I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that most individuals have a very hard time measuring distance traveled. Now, of course, if you have a GPS or an iPhone, that's super easy. But if you just have a compass, or maybe you're just taking a walk in the woods, and I said to you, hey, tell me how far you actually traveled, most people don't know. And that's okay, but today, we're gonna make that better. We're gonna teach you how to understand that measurement of distance traveled. Now, when we think about traveling from point A to point B, and figuring out that distance in between these two, okay, we use something called pace count. Now, pace count, simply put, is how many steps it takes you to cover a certain distance. So to find your pace count, you want to do a couple things. Either download an app on your phone that runners would use and put it on and then walk 100 meters, or get out the old tape measure and measure 100 meters. At that point, then you're going to begin walking off point A to point B of that 100 meters. Now, there's a little catch with this. I personally like to tell individuals that we're gonna count every other step. So how we do this is we start at the post and we're gonna begin to walk. We're only gonna count the paces on our left foot. That means we're gonna start by stepping with our right foot, left foot, and our left foot touching means that is one pace. So continue this process, then counting only when we step on our left foot until we reach the 100 meter mark. At that point, then we have a very rough estimate of what our pace count is over 100 meters. Now, there are a few things you want to take into consideration with the pace count once you get it. First of all, that is just a rough estimate of your pace count. Depending on what time of the year it is, what type of clothing you have on. Is it uphill? Is it downhill? Is it in rough terrain? Is it in nice grass? Is it on concrete? Is it on a hiking trail? Do you have a heavy backpack on? I mean, it just goes on and on and on with what can actually change that pace count. What I found, though, personally, is just get on a flat surface. If you're gonna wear a backpack the majority of the time while you're going to be utilizing this type of navigation tool, keep that backpack on. If you're probably just walking with a haversack, put that on and walk that way. I've never really personally got into the uphill downhill thing because it all pretty much evens out to what your ground walk is. What I do like to tell individuals, though, when you're gonna count your pace count, don't take huge strides like you're all fresh and you just jumped up and you're all ready to go. Pretend that you're almost a little bit tired and you're just walking slow and talking to your friend. That's most likely going to replicate what it's like when you're walking in the woods. So now that we have that, how do we actually utilize it? Well, if I was traveling a specific bearing and my friend told me if you travel this bearing for 1 kilometer, you're going to hit camp, I now can not only shoot that bearing and walk that straight line, but I can also count my paces as I go along. And I know that when I hit the 1 kilometer mark, that I should be very close to camp. If I overshoot or I keep counting and I'm way beyond 1 kilometer of walking, I know I probably messed something up and I need to either take a reverse azimuth to get back or simply backtrack. Likewise, if I was walking and I think I'm there, but I'm only at 500 meters, I know I need to keep going, so it's gonna just enhance that navigation of taking a bearing and walking. This is also a great tool to use when you're out hunting or trapping or even fishing along a creek. As you walk along, you can simply count your paces and you know how far you went back into the woods. That way, as it gets dark and you start to wander back out to your vehicle or back to the cabin, if you think, man, I should be there, am I lost? If you were counting on the way out and you know that you were 600 meters away from the cabin and on the way back we're now at 900 meter pace count, something went wrong. Maybe it's time to readjust. Or if you're like everybody else, they normally think they walked 1,000,000 miles and they didn't walk that far actually, so you might have to just keep on going to get to your ultimate location. Now, there are a few different ways that you can keep track of this, specifically if you're going over a very long distance. The first way that is the most popular is something that we call pacing beads. Now, pacing beads are very easy to use. They're just a way to track how far you walked. As you can see, there are 4 on the top and then there are 9 on the bottom. These 9 represent 100 meters each. So as I walk 100 meters, or in my case 67 paces, I drop 1 bead. Now if I forget where I'm at or I forget my count, I can just look here as a reference and I know I walked 100 meters. So every 67 paces I drop another bead. As I keep going along, I keep dropping beads down. Once I would drop all 9 beads to the bottom, okay, I know that when I count 67 paces again, there's no more beads to drop. So I come to the top set and I drop that down and I raise up the other 9. What this does is this now indicates that we walked 1 kilometer of distance, and then if we're gonna keep going, we can start using the lower beads yet again. So 67 more paces. Now I know I walked 1,000 meters plus another 100 meters. So I walked 1,100 meters if this is what my pace count bead setup was like. So that is the low down, super dirty, what pace count is and how it actually works. What we're gonna look at now is how we take that to a more advanced level, because we don't always just get to walk wherever we want while we're in the woods. So now we're gonna take those skills that I just talked about and we're gonna apply them in the field. Now it's important that you decide what you're actually using this for. Is it like the example I talked about, that you're going from your hunting cabin to your hunting stand and you wanna know approximate distance, so if it gets dark, you know about how far back you have to go? Or are you using it for an advanced navigation technique, which that's something we're gonna talk about in a future video. And that needs to be way more precise because we're actually creating a map and we need to know that exact distance back. Once you decide what you're actually using this for, it's gonna make life that much easier. If it's just for that rough estimate, you can be way more lenient than if you need that specific measurement for a map per se. We're gonna utilize this feature behind me right here. Although it's just some bushes I can easily walk through to get a nice clean measurement, we're gonna pretend for a second that that's something we can't get through and we need to bypass. And this is where people struggle the most. Remember, when we measure point A to point B with our pace count, it was an absolute straight line. It wasn't curving. So if we take an absolute straight line or a curved line from point A to B, of course that curved line is going to be longer. So we want to try our very best when we are doing this to count our paces in a straight line. But walking in the woods is very difficult to do in a straight line. So we're going to utilize this as something that we just can't walk a straight line. So do we judge it, or do we actually figure a way out to go past it, or do we go around it? What do we do? And that again refers back to if you're just worried about estimated distance, you can just go around this and you're going to be close and you'll be fine. But if you need a very precise distance, then you're going to have to do this. So for the rough measurement or the specific measurement, we're gonna do the same basic concept. I'm gonna walk through the rough estimate or rough measurement first because that's what most people are gonna do. So what happens is we get up to an object such as this behind me and we're gonna pretend that we just can't go through it. We need to somehow go around it. So what we're gonna do is when we walk up to that object, we're going to basically take a 90-degree turn out to one side and count our paces out until we're clear of that object. So in this case, it took me about 20 paces to clear this object. At that point then, I'm going to turn 90 degrees back and I'm gonna recount my paces again past that object. So at this point, I'm running parallel with the object. So I know that my distance parallel with this object is the same as if I would walk through it. Once I clear the object, I'm gonna turn back and I'm gonna again count about 20 paces back in, and I should be roughly on that same line. So all that I did was I took, instead of traveling this line straight, I came out, ran parallel, came back in and went. So I know these two parallel lines were even and I'm good to go. Now, if we're gonna be super precise with this, say we're using a compass and we need this exact measurement because we're making a map. So I'm traveling my bearing. We're gonna, for example here, say that this is a 0-degree bearing, we're headed north. So I'm gonna travel this 0-degree bearing. I get to the point that I know I can't go any further. So what I'm gonna do at this point is I'm going to dial my compass to 90. That is going to allow me to travel at 90 degrees different to my current bearing. So I'm gonna dial that, I'm gonna shoot a bearing at 90, pick a point out in the distance, and I'm gonna start to walk on that bearing line. Now it's important I count my paces this way. So this time my actual paces were 30, so I'm gonna write that down on my book. At this point then, I'm going to now dial 0 into my compass again because that was my origin of travel, and I'm going to begin to walk a 0-degree bearing, counting those paces. Once I'm clear of the object, I'm now going to dial my compass again 90 degrees, but this time the other direction. So I'm going to dial it 270 degrees. What that means now is I'm going to go back towards my original bearing line of 0. Again, I'm going to count 30 paces, and when I hit that mark, I know I'm back on that original bearing line. At this point, I can then dial 0 degrees, and I can continue on. Now I know that those two areas I traveled are parallel to each other. And now at this point, I know the distance from where I stopped to where I had to pick up that bearing again at. I know how far it was through that obstacle because I walked the line parallel to it. So it didn't mess up my measurements at all. So that's how you get an appropriate pace count, by boxing out an object. Yes, that is a lot of work, but as I said, in more advanced navigation, it is very, very important you get them precise measurements. So now that I blew up your mind, I'm gonna let you digest all of that information. I know you might have to go back and watch this video a little bit to grasp everything, but I did want to cover all these concepts because it's gonna be important for two reasons. Number one, in a future video, you're gonna need to just have a very good understanding of this just to make life that much easier. And secondly, it's another tool for your toolbox. Even if you don't go to the precise measurement that we talked about with those 90-degree angles, if you understand pace count, it's a good way when you're navigating or you're using terrain association navigation and you're just walking in the woods to get a good estimate of how far you actually traveled and where you actually are. So if you go back and you look at a map, you know that distance. So this was Dan Wall, Coalcracker Bushcraft. Look at it as another tool in the toolbox, and if you're gonna watch my videos in the future, this tool will definitely be getting all shined up and we're gonna be using it a lot. So as always, check us out at coalcrackerbushcraft.com, and until the next video, stay in the woods.